I sensed something was wrong the moment Darren called me into his office, with that plastic enthusiasm that usually meant one of two things: a corporate retreat or a quiet dismissal. "Melissa," he said, flashing that campaign trail grin. "We've got a new intern joining the analytics team straight out of Stanford. Bright kid, finance prodigy. You two will be a great team. Sure, like a fox and a hen make a great team." I'd been at Clearway Solutions in Phoenix, Arizona for nearly 10 years, most of them in compliance operations. I'd designed the current payroll audit system from the ground up. Not flashy work, but clean, stable, airtight. Now, I was expected to train the intern. I'd seen this before. It wasn't mentorship. It was phased replacement wrapped in a smile. Still, I played along. "Happy to help," I replied, echoing his tone with just a touch of sarcasm. The intern. Evan was 22, suited like a Wall Street trader and bouncing with overconfidence. He shook my hand too hard and beamed. "Can't wait to learn everything you do, I bet." We started with the basics: vendor workflows, risk thresholds, audit trails. Evan nodded along like he understood. He typed like a caffeinated squirrel. Every few minutes, he tossed out a new suggestion. "Why not just run it all through an open-source API? Can we build an AI to handle these approvals?" I kept my tone calm, my answers measured. Inside, I was screaming, "You can't automate judgment. You don't shortcut compliance." Darren hovered near our desks like a nervous father with a layoff notice in his back pocket. "Everything good?" he'd ask, fake sipping coffee. "Great," I'd say, without lifting my eyes. He's learning fast. What I didn't say Evan was learning things I never showed him. Asking about internal controls I hadn't introduced. Accessing folders I hadn't unlocked. One morning, I caught him flipping through archived compensation memos. Not casual browsing, he was studying them. I didn't confront him. I logged it, professionally, quietly. Then came the lunch meeting. Darren insisted I join him, Evan, and the regional CEO, Mr. Han, for team bonding. We met at an upscale Korean fusion place in Scottsdale. Sleek interior, soft jazz, elegant plates, prices designed for people who never look at totals. I sat across from Darren with Evan on my right and Mr. Han beside him. Darren ordered too quickly, too confidently. Evan nodded like he'd rehearsed. Then Darren leaned toward Mr. Han and muttered something in Korean. He assumed I didn't understand. He was very, very wrong. Then Darren leaned in toward Mr. Han and said something low and quick in Korean. I caught every syllable. "She doesn't know we'll let her go after this." "Shame. She seems like a hard worker." My chopsticks paused mid-air. Darren chuckled, clearly amused by his own cleverness. Mr. Han didn't smile. He just nodded, polite and unreadable. Evan looked confused, offering a half-hearted laugh as if trying to follow along. And me? I blinked once, set my chopsticks down, and reached calmly for my tea. Because what Darren didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd lived in Busan for 6 years. I earned my MBA at Yonsei University in Seoul. I read, wrote, and spoke Korean with fluency Darren couldn't fake on a menu. I'd filed tax reconciliation reports in Korean, reviewed contracts side by side with attorneys in Seoul. What he said wasn't just careless, it was confirmation. The betrayal hadn't started at lunch. It had begun months ago when Darren quietly slashed my department's budget, reassigned my senior staff to other teams, and began forwarding sensitive reports to Evan under email threads titled Knowledge Transfer and Streamlining. They weren't training Evan to support me. They were preparing him to replace me. But Darren made one critical mistake. He assumed language was a barrier. He didn't realize it was my advantage. From that day forward, I wasn't just documenting to protect myself, I was gathering evidence to expose him. This wasn't about revenge. It was about principle. For the women whose work goes uncredited, for the people labeled legacy before they're even 45, for the quiet professionals who keep companies afloat while someone else makes the PowerPoint. The next morning, something in me shifted. Darren walked past my desk as if nothing had happened. "Melissa," he said, tapping his mug, "can you forward Evan those compliance logs from Q1? He's eager to go deeper." "Of course," I replied, smiling without my eyes. "I'll clean them up first." By clean, I meant trap. I created a new folder on my private drive, Phase 1, Passive Capture. Inside it, copies of the Q1 logs with several rows discreetly labeled in Korean. Not overtly suspicious, just subtle enough to look like leftover audit notes. But the truth, those entries weren't from Q1. They were part of a confidential internal investigation from 2020. Data that no intern or manager should ever access. I didn't need to bait them, just leave breadcrumbs. And sure enough, within the hour, I saw the file open on our shared drive. Then, in the access log, Evan had copied it to his desktop. Perfect. Meanwhile, Darren pinged me on Slack. The message read casual, but the subtext was clear. Quick heads up, I'm bringing Evan to next week's compliance meeting. Think it's time he gets exposure to real-time oversight. Exposure, that's what they were calling it now. I typed back, great initiative. I'll prep him with some context beforehand. Translation, I'd feed him just enough to get tangled in his own performance. That week, I began reclassifying a few low-priority folders. I renamed outdated training decks using legal-sounding acronyms. Swapped out harmless column headers for cryptic labels like VC attestation. Normal enough to pass a skim. Odd enough to confuse anyone who didn't truly understand the structure, and Evan tripped hard. During Thursday's meeting, when our head of legal, Denise, asked about the latest vendor onboarding batch, Evan leapt in like a game show contestant. Well, he said confidently, scrolling his tablet according to the VC attestation index, all vendors exceed FTL thresholds for Q2. The room went dead quiet. FTL. That wasn't a threshold. It was a joke I'd made in 2018 while beta testing our internal tools. Fake term limit. I'd used it once on a dummy report as a placeholder. Darren blinked. Denise tilted her head. What threshold exactly does FTL measure? Evan hesitated. Vendor authorization to invoice limits. She smiled politely. There's no such metric in our system. Evan looked at Darren. Darren looked at me. I didn't flinch. I just took a calm sip of coffee. That should have been the wake-up call. But Darren wasn't wired for retreat. He was the kind of guy who doubled down even when the floor was cracking beneath him. The next morning, I smelled the desperation before he even spoke. He called me into a glass breakout room wearing that overly concerned face like a cheap cologne. Hey, Melissa, you've seemed a little quiet lately. Everything all right? I nodded. Very good. Just focused. He leaned closer like he was about to share insider secrets. Evan's rough around the edges, but sharp. Let's give him space to grow. Yeah? You've got a lot of institutional memory. Just don't make it too hard to follow. Ah? So, I should dumb it down for the prodigy to steal faster. I tilted my head. Of course. I'll make things easier. He smiled, thinking he'd scored a win. But he didn't know I'd already made my move. Earlier that morning, I installed a silent listener in our approval system. Every file Evan touched would now send a mirrored copy to a secure folder shared with our overseas audit team in Singapore. And Mr. Han, the regional CEO from lunch. Oh, I hadn't forgotten him. Not even for a second. I hadn't forgotten Mr. Han either. He didn't laugh at Darren's remark, didn't encourage it, just nodded. Stoic. Impenetrable. But when I passed him in the hallway the following Monday, I gave the smallest respectful nod and said softly in Korean, "Thank you for the lunch meeting. I learned a lot." He froze for a heartbeat. Then he smiled. Not wide, not warm, but sharp. Knowing. He knew I'd understood every word. From that moment, I wasn't invisible anymore. That's when the gears began to shift. While Darren was busy posturing about succession planning and dropping buzzwords in closed-door calls, and Evan was offering feedback on workflows he barely grasped, I was already deep into Phase 2 evidence compilation. Every altered document Evan touched, every system timestamp Darren quietly edited, every whisper made in a language they thought I couldn't hear. They assumed I was quiet because I felt threatened. If you found strength in this story, consider subscribing. There's more truth, more quiet power, and more chapters still unfolding. The truth, I was quiet because I was building something slow, precise, and irreversible. By the third week, Darren had stopped pretending. No more soft mentorship mask. No more false collegiality. He skipped greetings and jumped straight into critique. The louder I became without ever raising my voice, the more he unraveled. "Let's just move faster," he barked in a Tuesday morning sync, dismissing my deck with a flick of his hand like my slides were napkins he didn't ask for. "Melissa's methods are thorough, sure, but we don't need gold-plated compliance. We need agility." Evan, eager to play executive in training, nodded like a bobblehead. "Exactly. We could probably eliminate half the approval steps and still be safe." I blinked slowly. Without risk, Evan started to reply, but Darren cut in. "Melissa, we appreciate your legacy processes, but we're modernizing. Evan's been in touch with some tech partners, platforms that can really streamline things." I looked at Darren, then at Evan, and then I delivered the sharpest line I had. "If you want to restructure payroll compliance without understanding it, you'll need to coordinate with legal." Darren smirked, narrowing his eyes. "We'll loop them in when we're ready." And there it was, the final confirmation. This wasn't just about pushing me out. They were planning to dismantle what I had spent a decade refining, strip it for parts, stamp their names on it, and call it innovation. But they forgot one thing. I wasn't done watching. I was done waiting. And the worst part, they didn't even grasp the scale of damage they were courting. To them, payroll was just numbers in a spreadsheet. Rows, formulas, approvals. They didn't see the regulatory minefields, the cross-border tax triggers, the fragile timing of multi-jurisdiction payments. You mess up once, you don't get a friendly memo. You get a full-scale audit with fine subpoenas and headlines. But Darren and Evan weren't going to wait for reality to slap them. They were going to fake innovation until the next quarterly review, hoping no one looked too closely. So I gave them what they wanted. I started feeding Evan training decks with flashy titles like Streamlined Approval Pathways, V3, and Optimized Audit Exemptions. Sleek designs, crisp tables. They looked legit, but inside poison. Each file was loaded with outdated policies, regulatory loopholes we'd sealed years ago, and legacy test cases that had never passed legal scrutiny. I sprinkled just enough valid data in to make it look real. Evan ate it up like Halloween candy. "Wow," he messaged one afternoon. "This is so much cleaner than the docs in the portal. Why didn't we implement this sooner?" "Because we didn't want the company sued into the ground, Evan." But I just replied, "Some things take time." Meanwhile, Darren kept circling like a buzzword-spitting hawk. He began pitching a cost-neutral overhaul of payroll compliance to the executive team. He called it Project Ember. Sent out a teaser deck packed with nonsense, like resilient integration, lean forward operations, and digitally harmonized workflows. I nearly gagged. Slide 9 included a glowing quote attributed to me: "The new system eliminates redundancy while improving clarity. Melissa T., Senior Compliance Manager." Except I never said that. He'd lifted the line from an internal email I wrote in 2021 about migrating SharePoint folders. I screenshotted it, saved it in my evidence folder labeled Fabrications. At that point, the file had grown to over 130 items. Slack threads falsified, approval chains, screenshots of Evan adjusting permissions he never had. Even emails Darren sent to contractors requesting automation demos that bypassed every safeguard we'd implemented over the past 5 years. But the real tipping point came that Thursday. Evan submitted a reconciliation report to legal. Without me, he CC'd Darren and wrote, per Melissa's recent changes to the vendor flow, this file should now qualify for auto-approval. Except I hadn't made a single change. I hadn't even spoken to Evan that day. I opened the file. He'd manually lowered the approval threshold by 40%, and the vendor one we had flagged and frozen last quarter for suspicious activity. My jaw tensed. This wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was sabotage. My hand clenched tighter around the mouse. Slowly, deliberately, I began pulling the metadata. Evan hadn't just submitted a bad file. He'd used my report template, my formatting. And worse, he'd listed me as the source. Darren knew. Of course he knew. He was laying the groundwork to pin everything on me when it blew up. One convenient fall person for the entire mess. So I made a choice. I composed a message to Mr. Han. In Korean. Precise, formal, measured. The kind of language that doesn't just translate. It slices. Mr. Han, I've identified multiple changes being attributed to my department without authorization. Attached are select examples. These files have not passed through proper compliance channels. I'm concerned they may be circulated as final. No accusation, simply a request for internal review, no drama, no emotion, just a quiet knock on the right door. 12 minutes later, he responded, "Understood. Please continue documenting. We will review internally." That was it. No meetings. No questions. Just a green light? But I knew exactly what it meant. When silence comes from the top, it's not ignorance, it's strategy. By Monday, the air in the office had changed. Not louder, not quieter. Just tight. People started saying good morning a little too quickly. Slack messages slowed to a crawl. Eyes darted more. Smiles tightened. No one said anything outright, but the tension. It was palpable. Darren didn't know yet, but Mr. Han had begun watching. And I had begun tightening the noose. It started small. I submitted a request to IT for an access audit. Routine, I said. Quarterly check. Nobody blinked. I was the one who usually managed them anyway. 24 hours later, I had the full report in hand, every file accessed, every folder opened. Evan had been in the payroll sandbox 3 times that week. One of those times, he'd used an administrative override and access level that only 2 people had. Me and Darren. Except I'd voluntarily revoked my override 6 months ago after our last internal compliance sweep. Darren didn't know that, so how had Evan accessed it? Answer: Darren gave him his login credentials. In any healthy company, that would have triggered an immediate security review. But Darren ran this department like his personal fiefdom. He operated behind closed doors, manipulated org charts like chess pieces, and passed off interns as visionaries. So I did what I always did. I documented. Cleanly. Carefully. With timestamps, attachments, and a quiet fury Darren would never hear coming. I documented everything. Then uploaded the full access audit into the growing dossier I labeled Ember Fraud, a nod to Darren's pet project. I didn't just want exposure. I wanted traceability. Because the truth is, men like Darren don't collapse from their mistakes alone. They fall when everyone sees it all at once. So I started preparing for that moment. I gathered every doctored email, every tampered approval, every fabricated attribution, then cross-referenced each item with our actual compliance protocols. Every mismatch, every contradiction. And then I translated the entire file into Korean. Twice. Once in polished business, Korean for Mr. Han. Once in formal regulatory Korean for our Seoul-based legal office. I added one note in both versions. Please review. Discrepancies between documented policy and implementation may pose reputational risk if left unaddressed. No emotion, no appeal, just facts. Clean, sharp, weaponized, and I sent it. Not to Darren, not to legal, but to Mina, Mr. Han's longtime executive assistant, the same Mina who used to sit quietly in board meetings, never speaking, always observing. She was the whisper behind every decision that mattered. I hadn't seen her in person in over a year, but I still had her contact. She replied the next morning with only 2 words: "I see." That was all I needed. The real shift came Thursday afternoon during our team sync when Darren decided to roll out operational enhancements. He walked in 10 minutes late, naturally holding one of those green smoothies he never drank. His smug grin was dialed to maximum, like he just sold payroll to Elon Musk. "We're going to streamline the approval process," he announced, gesturing toward Evan like a proud parent. "We've been piloting a new flow thanks to Evan's incredible work and plan to roll it out next quarter." No mention of me. No mention that the prototype was built on doctored documents and logic we'd already decommissioned. He clicked through the slides like he was on stage at a product launch, buzzwords everywhere. Then came the final bullet: Melissa will transition into an advisory role for institutional knowledge retention. Knowledge retention, like I was a dusty filing cabinet. I stayed still. Face unreadable. Then Evan jumped in, wide-eyed, and rehearsed. And we've already implemented most of the updates from Melissa's previous notes, so the transition should be seamless. Except I'd written no such notes. Darren turned to me. Melissa, you've been a tremendous help during this transition. We really appreciate your adaptability. Adaptability, the sanitized term for thanks for training your replacement. Now step aside. I smiled, small controlled, because they had no idea the real presentation had already begun. Happy to contribute, I said calmly. Let me know when you're ready for the formal transition memo. Darren nodded, completely unaware. What he didn't know, that memo had already been sent. Just not to him. Because 2 hours before that meeting, an email had gone out from Seoul HQ. Not internally, externally. To our global audit partners, to our legal counsel, to the board of directors. Subject line, compliance irregularities under review. Payroll department attached. The email included 3 attachments. 1. An access audit showing unauthorized administrative overrides. 2. A reconciliation report highlighting threshold manipulation. 3. A detailed attribution map linking my name to documents I never touched. Each file was translated, time-stamped, and verified, and below them, all submitted by Melissa T. I. Senior Compliance Officer, Fluency in Korean Certified Cross-Reference recommended. The trap had been sprung, but I wasn't finished. Because traps don't just reveal the truth. They humiliate the ones who thought they'd never be caught. I had one more move left. The invite came late Sunday night. Simple, clean, cold. Subject: payroll review and organizational realignment attendance, mandatory details. Not listed. Just a Zoom link and 2 names in the sender field. Mr. Han, Mina Kim. I didn't reply. Just read it twice and smiled. By Monday morning, the entire department was vibrating with silent dread. Darren walked in with that same forced swagger, but his smile was tight. His shirt was too stiff. I could smell his cologne from across the room, the one he only wore before board reviews or when he knew he was about to be cornered. Evan wasn't bouncing around anymore either. He sat hunched at his desk, staring blankly at his laptop like he was trying to recalculate his future. I didn't say a word to either of them. At exactly 10:01 a.m., the call began. Mr. Han appeared first, calm, sharp, unreadable. Then Mina joined, impeccable as always. Navy blazer, no background filter, no pleasantries. Darren jumped in immediately, trying to control the narrative. Thank you both for making the time, he said, voice a little too loud. Just wanted to share progress on our payroll restructuring. Evan's been leading a terrific initiative, and we've got a strong foundation already laid out. He launched the screen share like it was a TED Talk, clicking through slides so fast you'd think someone had hit fast forward. I sat back watching, because Darren didn't know that the final slide had already been written, and it wasn't in his deck. Darren's voice came in just a touch too loud. Thank you for making the time. We just wanted to align with Seoul on the recent payroll improvements, especially those introduced under the new Ember structure. He smiled like a man who still believed he was steering the ship. Then he motioned toward Evan's feed on the screen. Evan's done incredible work, and we're eager to walk you through the progress. Without being prompted, he launched his screen share. He moved through the slides like a magician, forcing a card, fast, polished, rehearsed. Charts, diagrams, buzzwords. There was even a comparison slide, Melissa T's legacy framework versus Ember Flow future state. And of course, a glowing thank you slide at the end. None of this would have been possible without Melissa's foundational efforts. We're proud of the transition. My jaw didn't move. My expression didn't shift. Then Mina leaned slightly forward. Before we proceed, she said quietly, I'd like to address a concern. Darren blinked. Sure. Of course. She shared her screen. File name, Ember, fraud, full.zip. I recognized it instantly. Every file I had compiled, every manipulated record, every mistranslated memo, Every fake quote Darren attributed to me, but Mina didn't narrate. She let the silence do the talking. Click. She opened the access audit. Click. The altered thresholds. Click. Click. The email from Evan per Melissa's recent changes. She zoomed in on the timestamp, opened the revision log, cross-referenced metadata. Darren cleared his throat. I think there's been a misunderstanding. That document wasn't finalized. Evan must have used a draft. Mina didn't flinch. That draft was sent to legal and to your external contractor as a compliance-certified workflow. Are you suggesting that was accidental? Darren stammered. Evan looked like he wanted to disappear into his screen. Pale, eyes darting like he was searching for an exit key. That's when Mr. Han finally spoke. We were unaware Melissa was being transitioned. She's fluent in Korean correct. Darren froze. Yes, I believe she studied in Korea for several years, Mr. Han continued. Holds a certification in regulatory Korean compliance. Were you aware of that? Darren opened his mouth, then closed it again, because in that moment he realized this wasn't a check-in. It was a reckoning. Darren's mouth opened, then closed. Mina continued, still composed. Several documents in your Ember proposal used Melissa's name. We verified those attributions are false. She did not draft, approve, or review those files. She clicked again. The translations were pulled from archived documentation and altered using Melissa's original formatting. Darren turned toward him. Evan's voice trembled. Darren told me to use her template. I thought she'd approved it. You forged her approval. Mina said flat and clear. Then she looked directly at me. Melissa, do you have anything to add? I met the camera's lens without blinking. Just one thing. I opened a folder on my end. This is the original Ember deck, I said. Slide 6. It displayed a quote. The new system eliminates redundancy while improving clarity. Melissa T. I clicked into the revision log, showing my original comment. Removing compliance steps for speed is like skipping parachute checks to save time. Might work until it doesn't. Darren sagged in his seat, visibly shrinking. It was like watching a beach ball slowly lose air. Mr. Han turned off his camera briefly, then came back on. Effective immediately, he said, voice calm but firm. Darren K. is placed on administrative leave. An external audit will begin this week. He paused, glancing at the camera feed. Evan's internship is also concluded. Then he shifted toward me. Melissa, going forward, you will report directly to Seoul HQ. Your new title will be Director of Global Payroll Compliance. A second later, my inbox dinged. New contract. Signed by Mr. Han himself. I gave a small nod. No smile. Because this wasn't triumph. It was justice. Darren, still desperate, made one last attempt. I was just trying to modernize. Make things leaner. I didn't know she was watching every step. I cut him off. I wasn't watching, I said quietly. I was listening. Then I switched to Korean. You thought I didn't understand. I remembered every word. Mina gave the faintest nod. Mr. Han smiled for the first time that morning. Meeting adjourned, he said. Click. Call ended. Darren sat frozen. Evan stared at his keyboard like it might swallow him whole. I stood calm and measured, gathered my things, no speech, no mic drop, just the quiet power of being underestimated and proving them all wrong. No victory lap, no smug strut, just calm, controlled, fluent, because real power doesn't always shout. It moves quietly, with purpose. I walked past Darren's office on my way out. He sat slumped in his chair, staring blankly at his monitor, as if waiting for the universe to offer a reset button. Evan avoided eye contact, entirely hunched over his keyboard, typing without direction, just trying to look busy in a world that had already moved on without him. The office around us remained still. No whispers, no questions. Just a thick, collective awareness that something big had shifted, and I was at the center of it. I paused at the elevator, my badge clipped neatly to my blazer. When the doors opened, I didn't look back. Because I didn't need to. My exit didn't need an audience. That afternoon, my new credentials went live: Director of Global Payroll Compliance, remote access to international accounts, full oversight, a seat at the executive table I had once been locked out of, and an email from Mina, short and sharp: next steps to follow. Seoul is watching. You've earned this. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I closed it and turned to the fresh draft of our global audit policy. It was time to build something better, not out of spite, but out of standard, out of clarity, out of principle. I'd watched men like Darren coast through boardrooms for years, writing charm jargon and borrowed credibility. I knew his type. What he never realized was that quiet doesn't mean weak, and silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. He thought language was a wall, but it had been my weapon. And while he had been laughing in a language he assumed I couldn't understand, I had been documenting every move, every misstep, every forged line of credit he thought no one would question. Sometimes revenge doesn't scream. Sometimes it speaks with calm articulation in perfectly fluent Korean. And it lands not with noise, but with precision. If my story resonated with you, even in the smallest way, I'd love to hear it. Drop a comment below and let me know what part hit hardest. Have you ever been underestimated like I was? Have you ever had to stay quiet until the time was right? Your support reminds people like me that silent strength is still strength, and we are not alone. To anyone watching, don't let someone else define your value. Document everything. Know your worth. And never confuse patience with weakness, because when you move with precision, you don't need volume to be heard. You just need truth. And finally, if you believe more people need to hear stories like mine, subscribe, share, start the conversation. Not every victory needs a war cry. Sometimes justice sounds like a single sentence in the right language at the right time.